So as it comes out of the box, there's a little bit of assembly to do. You should have some, you should basically have those parts and some stuff over there for the air system. And we'll go through the procedure of putting this thing together. So the first thing we're going to want to do is mount that aluminum arm onto the whole tracking system, and then get that mounted up on the grinder, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to set this up on a tripod back here, and hopefully get a decent assembly video here without my body being in the way too much. We'll have to see. I'm here by myself, so this might be a little tricky. Anyhow, the first thing to do is get this arm mounted onto here. So there's a couple of screws, a couple of holes. It probably came with the screws in there. I've already taken that part out. So those go into there. It's all pretty self-explanatory. Now that arm's assembled. From here, while it's still a little bit light, I like to take this whole thing and actually put it onto the grinder. So we come over here, and it goes on the left side as you're looking at the grinder. I'm trying to stay out of the camera view here, so I'll get a couple of those started and come around on the back side and tighten those up. So those three go on there. That thing flops around a little bit. One of the next things we want to do, I find it works the best if we get the gas spring on there now, because with the gas spring it'll hold this thing up. So get rid of these screws here. This one here, there's also a washer on this one, and that washer is a spacer for the inside, believe it or not. So when we look at this cylinder, we're going to want the hole here on the left side, so it points out towards where all the air is. And then when we look at the heim joint, we'll see it's off center. There's a bushing here that protrudes. I had to stick a bushing in there because the heim joint has a hole that's too big. So I'm going to put that bushing on my right hand side here, and pass the screw through it and tighten it up. None of this is rocket surgery. I've probably got handier tools out than you because you know, we're building grinders here. So because of that off centering in there, I provided a washer. There's no real good reason for this other than I'm a weirdo, and that's how I like to do things. So I actually stick that washer inside so that I'm off center on the bottom the same as I am on the top. So that washer goes in there to counteract that bushing. That goes through there. This goes through here. Open that up. Now, when you're showed up, either this plate or this plate may not be mounted on there. This is the way they mount. So this one here, you can see the long leg is in the back. It mounts onto the only two holes that are there. But up here, I don't know if I have one of these arms around. Let me take a look, because I should have one somewhere. I do. So there's a whole series of holes in here so that thing can be adjustable. The way I like to run my grinder, the difference here becomes how much slack there is when you release the thing. I like to use that hole and whatever hole it ends up down here on the bottom, but I like there to be one hole above the bracket, and that gives me the tension that I like. You may experiment and find that you like something different. So if yours came without the bracket mounted on it, let's see if I can get this in camera. The bracket goes on like this and into that hole. Real simple. But if you want a little more slack, you can move up to that one. So it's adjustable depending on your wheels. Like say you wanted a 14-inch wheel, you might want a little more slack when it's released than other people do, so you can adjust this and move it to a different hole. So anyhow, that's that. So basically it's starting to look like a grinder now. One of the next things we need to do is mount the actual tracking wheel itself. And we're not gonna be able to see that from this angle, so I'm gonna move this thing over here and see if we can get it. So that goes on there, and you should have this long bolt either mounted in here already or in the bag of hardware that showed up. If it's in there, yank it out. That's gonna pass through here. So that is our actual pivot. So that slides in there, that goes on there, and then you get a 3/16 Allen wrench and tighten that sucker up and it'll work. I've got a power one. There we go, tracking's mounted. So basically now you've got a grinder. Once you mount the motor and the electronics to it, that should be about the extent of the assembly you have to do. There's not really a whole lot. We'll move this back around over here and show a few of these things. So we've got, get a little more room here. Well, there's 3 holes here up front. Those are for mounting your VFD bracket. If you're mounting to a pedestal, those 2 holes there, those are for mounting your air cylinder if you're mounting to a pedestal. If you're mounting to a bench, like pretend you've made an actual bench like my assembly bench here, well then you can mount them things any old damn where you want. But if you're doing it on a pedestal, like this one over here, then that VFD bracket can hang off of the bottom and a couple of things like that. So I've built it to be both self-contained and also you can do it another way if you want. This piece right here, you're gonna wonder what the hell that piece is for when you're assembling this grinder, because it doesn't seem to make any sense. That piece actually bolts on there, again, if you're on a pedestal. And then a gooseneck light, which you can get from MSC or from me, mounts onto this hole here and allows, you know, gives you light where you want it. So with the gooseneck light, you can point the light wherever you want. And because of this protruding out here, it allows you to still rotate the grinder. And when you find the right spot, the gooseneck light now still fits here and everything still works. So it doesn't interfere with the light. So that's that main part of the assembly. The only other tricky bit will be the air, and you know, that's not really tricky. There's a handle that goes up there. You don't use it really for a lot. When you buy the grinder with the gas spring, if you're using well, the pneumatic spring, if you're using a gas spring because you don't have an air compressor or for whatever reason, then you get to use this to shrink and compress the thing, which is pretty important. So it gives you some leverage. That's really the whole assembly. The only other thing, I'll show it on this other grinder body over here, would be the air. And so the VFD mount like that, and now your VFD will mount on the face of it. Or if you're mounting onto a workbench, you can still use that VFD mount, but mount your VFD wherever you want. And just point this thing, instead of hanging off the edge this way, you can now mount it on your bench that way, and your VFD still mounts. The air looks like that. You've got a flow control that goes in the air cylinder there. Use pipe dope on all this stuff so you don't get any air leaks. It looks like this down here. So there's a 1/4 inch flow control that goes here, an 1/8 inch flow control that goes there. Make sure everything's flowing the right direction. So the valve goes on one way. The valve's got an arrow pointing the way the air runs. The air cylinder's got the same thing. There should be 2 1032 screws to mount your your regulator there. If you're building this thing onto a bench, you can put your regulator wherever you want. I've got it set up right now with just straight pipe fittings, but if you're mounting onto a pedestal like this, you might want to replace this spot with an elbow so that this is down, and you just don't have, you know, once you put your hose on here, you don't have it hanging off a foot here, where later on you come by and lean on it and break the damn thing. So you could have this whole thing pointed down and be a little more unobtrusive. You can plumb that however you want. That's one of the things I'm big on, is a little bit of this thing's modular. Some of it you can just figure out what works best for you. That's the whole assembly thing. There's really not a lot to it. The arms, there's holes on both sides so they can go anywhere you want. They're cool, they adjust. So right now that one's tight. A lot of people don't realize that these adjusting levers are now spring loaded, so you can get it when it's tight. You can have it be in any position you want. It's still tight, you pull that out and it rotates over. They can go on the inside. I actually generally keep them on the inside on mine, on the bottom. And if you're using a big wheel or a big, you know, if you're using a 12 or a 14-inch wheel, it's going to interfere with some of these anyhow, because your wheel will actually come back into this area. So you got to get those things on the other side, but it allows for that. The wheel goes in there, you know, once your motor's on. You want a 1/4-inch gap between here and here. So the easiest way is to just lay a drill bit on there. Slide this, push that on until it's on the motor, and it bumps your drill. Then you've got your gap set. When you start tuning it, you know what, I've got another video. I'm not going to get into the tuning it and all that stuff on here right now. But that's it. That's the assembly. That goes on there. I'm not going to get into how that stuff bolts down, because hopefully if you bought this from me, you're smart enough to be able to figure out some of that stuff for yourself, or else I made a bad decision in selling you this thing, because you're going to be a pain in my butt and make a whole lot of phone calls. That's it. That is the ÜberGrinder Assembly, and I'll make another video here shortly on using it and how to set some stuff up. Oh, the only other thing I can get at is, now we'll do that in a second video here, on the assembly of the platen, and there's a specific way it needs to go together for everything to run right. So we'll call this one done, and I'll shoot another one here for that. Have fun with your new grinder. Here's a real quick vid to explain a couple of the things I pointed out in the other video. But you know, the grinder wasn't completely assembled, so I couldn't show you. This is my personal grinder, one of them. So that gap we were talking about, if you get a 1/4 inch pin, this happens to be a freaking Papermate pen, and it's the right height. You get something that's a 1/4 inch and set that up in there, and that's how you set your wheel height. The motor, when you mount the motor, mount it so that the control box is pointed that direction. So when this is up, when it's rotated 90 degrees, the box actually points down. You can see it back in there. If you've got it pointed the wrong way, it'll interfere and stuff when it rotates. So I like to point that down. This shows the arm with the gooseneck light on it. So with the arm mounted there, I can put this light, you know, wherever the heck I want there to be light. And because of that arm that's down there, let's see if I can get a better angle here. Because of that arm that's down there, this will rotate still any direction that I want it to, and the light doesn't interfere. I can push this light around. I can adjust this light and get it pointed right where I want it to, and everything still works. So you've got light. There's the VFD mounted on a plate. It's a little bit different mount that I used to make, but it works with the same damn principle. I think that's it. So that's how that looks. That's an older grinder that only has 2 arms, and I've got it just set up with as a lock grinder nowadays. I built a rack to hold the bulk of my arms and whatnot, so it gets them out of the way. There was the very first aluminum grinder that I made, and it didn't rotate. I made this and quickly realized, like, well, hell, why don't I make it so that it rotates 90 degrees. And there's my KMG. That was the second grinder I ever bought, and my hardcore, which was the first grinder that I ever bought. So I got that. I made my very first knives on that. Then I upgraded. Well, I don't say upgraded. I upgraded by buying a second grinder. I got that. I bought a LeBlanc horizontal grinder, and I really didn't like it. So that was when I first started making horizontal grinders. Then I made a vertical grinder, and then decided to make one that did both. This one's set up so that the VFD is shared between the 2 grinders. So when I turn it on, right now it's running the KMG. But if I turn it off and toggle that middle switch, now it runs that grinder over there. So one VFD runs 2 grinders. That's it. That's my grinding room. It's a mess in here right now.